By the time this video is out, the Paris 2024 Olympic Games have long since come and gone, which I haven't really followed if I'm going to be honest, aside from me thinking of this idea before this iteration of the Olympic Games came around. Either way, I won't let faulted scheduling stop me, because heisters never stay asleep for too long, especially with the prospect of gold medals on the horizon. So today I answer the question, can you beat Payday 2? As an Olympic athlete? Of course, the fact of the matter is that shooting, i.e. using guns, is a valid part of the Olympic sport lineup. While I could simply just do a standard Payday 2 guns run through career mode and call it a day, I figured that'd be too boring. Plus, if there are opportunities to rep multiple Olympic sports, then I should fit as many of them into my setup as physically possible. So, let's discuss how this will work. Much like the Alphabet Challenge run, I will be aiming to get through all of the career mode heists, from the jewelry store and bank heist to the White House. Unlike the previous outing, as well as a future outing of a past run, don't look too deeply into that, I will be plowing through the career mode on the Death Wish difficulty. I'm sure that won't come back to bite me later. As for what we're allowed to use, we can only use equipment that would be sanctioned as usable in an Olympic sport, and to use multiple sports equipment pieces where possible. You may think that this will limit our options greatly, but you'll see how we'll work around this in due time. I will also be using the standard Vanilla HUD Plus as my HUD mod for this run, and the More Heists and Crime Spree mod, which are likely set to be the only mods that will be relevant in this run. And I will also be riding solo on Loud Heists, but I can bring my AI crewmates to Stealth Heists if what they end up doing is not going to be relevant to the heist's outcome. Other than these main points, anything goes really. Anyway, with that taken care of, let's do this. In the spirit of athleticism and pure-blooded sportiness, I decided to play as Sydney for this challenge run. She is played by a charity swimmer and becomes one herself, of course, so it all works out. As for what we can work with, we can simply look at the list of Olympics certified sports from its modern conception all the way back in Athens 1896 to the present day of Paris 2024. Overall, the sports we can pull from in our setup are as follows: archery, athletics, baseball/softball, boxing, hockey, javelin throw, karate, and shooting. So we might as well work out what we can actually use with this knowledge. First, it's time for Olympics fact number 1. Did you know that shooting has been a part of the Olympics since the very first of the modern Olympic Games in Athens 1896? While that does give me the mental image of the likes of Jesse James and Billy the Kid shooting for gold medals repping the US of A, there's also one key factor in this line of sport in the Olympics. It's split into 3 main categories: pistols, shotguns, and rifles. As such, I'll be limiting myself to pistols, shotguns, and sniper rifles, as I feel the latter fits the third category the most. Granted, I'll be using certain weapons only, so here's the legal gun lineup I decided to roll with. In terms of pistols, I decided to use the Crosskill for loud and the M13 9mm for stealth. In terms of shotguns, I allowed the Rheinfeld 880 and Jocelyn in my primary slot, and the Locomotive and GSPS in my secondary slot. And for rifles, I chose the R700 as a primary and the Pronghorn for a secondary. To cover archery, I decided to go for an Olympic standard Deka compound bow, effectively acting as the middle ground between the Plains Rider and the English longbow. In melee, I can use the Overkill boxing gloves, baseball bat, hockey stick, and the empty palm kata. And for throwables, the only legible answer is the trusty javelin. Overall, I'd say this is a fairly decent hand to be dealt for one of these challenge runs, though only time will tell how effective they'll all be. The general gist of my setup for builds is that I have to split into 4 similar builds. One to cover each of my main shooting options and another for stealth. I'm also mainly running a muscle build with Yakuza on the stealth build. Gotta have the muscle to lift the heavy loot after all. Why would I not go for something like Kingpin? Well, if you don't know the answer, I think it's already time for Olympics fact number 2. Did you know that between 1968 and 2020 there have been over 400 cases of positive doping tests at the Olympics? That means that there may not be anything stopping us from following suit. But you see,
professionals have standards.
So with that taken care of, our quest to the heisting gold medal begins at the jewelry store. And even on Death Wish, this is not a hard heist at all, which makes sense. There was a threat that things could get messy with the cops at the hot dog stand seeing my dirty work, but I was just about able to save the situation and completed my haul in a little over 5 minutes. Bank heist, likewise, was more of a patience thing than anything else, and once all of the guards were dispatched and the drill was up, it was only a matter of time before my success rocked around. Diamond Store is the next to go, and it's also just an exercise in patience. Once the alarm was off, my natural tactic came into play. Tie down as many as possible and plug speed holes into everyone else. Bloody, but nothing too straining in the end, a simple 7-minute clear. As for Go Bank, this was where things needed to go loud for the first time, and I opted to make use of the sniper rifles as my first port of call. And it did decently well, all things considered. I thought the R700 would struggle to keep up with Death Wish mobs, but as long as I kept landing headshots, the spike damage combined with graze and crits would allow me to sustain myself. If anything, the real hard part was having to stand in the vault lockpicking for minutes at a time. Thankfully, I only needed 3 boxes before I got myself a money bag, meaning I could hold out on the roof until the plane grabbed the cage. With that, I could simply slink into the sewers uncontested and race my way to the end. Though I did get a low odds event to happen at the end, as there were a couple of FBI units waiting for me at the van. Nothing I couldn't handle, but it was something I hadn't seen in a while. Either way, it was a great inexplicable first time clear of a usually problematic heist, so I'm not complaining. Up next is the transport jobs, and seeing how well the sniper build worked for Go Bank, I opted for a compound bow pronghorn build for the underpass job. It doesn't go well. I get pasted by the responding FBI and GenSec units quickly and ruthlessly twice in quick succession. Even when I could get one of the unit's assistants on attempt number 3, it still didn't guarantee success as I had to lean into feigned death for the first time this run, especially since I only had one good weapon to make use of for crowds. I'm saying this as if the compound bow isn't useful in loud heists. God no, far from it. It's just that it's far too slow most of the time to make use of its key strength in high-intensity situations. It's only really good for single high-health targets like bulldozers. But if I land those good shots at all, the bow's raw power is second only to the javelins in my build. It did help deal with one bulldozer handily enough, but the situation got to me when dealing with his mate, ending in mutually assured destruction. Attempt number 4 didn't go much better, but it at least served as good practice for learning how to use the bow effectively. Finally, on attempt number 5, I pulled it together, using my kit to its full potential and deadlifting 5 bags of gold all the way to the van. I even redeemed the bow's usefulness by 4-shotting a minigun dozer under pressure, so that's nice. While I feel as though my underpass performance won't be winning any medals anytime soon, the park run was much cleaner, although I did take an early spill on attempt number 1 to a pair of bulldozers. Thankfully, the second crack of the whip went much smoother, courtesy of the shotgun build I was rocking. The key here was that I split my 4 legal shotguns into groups of 2. The Reinfeld and Locomotive would use buckshot, and the Jocelyn and GSPS would use flechette. I don't really use flechette all that much in this game, but its usefulness over range was really apparent, especially with overkill basic and crits on top of that. With this useful system on deck and a pair of javelins to a dozer's face, I was handily able to mop up the park run with little fuss. All that left was the tricky train heist. I didn't fancy my chances doing this quietly, especially with twin shotguns, so it was off to do this loud. It worked far better than it had any right to, if I'm gonna be honest. My flechette GSPS was amazing, even being able to counter-snipe snipers and kill enemies from all the way across the bridge. I did have to lean into feign death, and the hard part really began when I had to stop ferrying bags to the pickup, guzzling AFKs like crazy just to stay afloat. Fighting through all of the assault waves while having to ferry bags onto zip lines and then by hand was not my idea of a good time, but I continued to fight my way through it all until I landed the Javelin of Destiny into this minigun dozer. With this fight won, I managed to get all 20 bags of ammo into the truck and darted to the finish line with no first aid kits remaining. That was a brutal but inexplicable first time clear, which I'll gladly take. A solid W for the shotgun build. With the first wave of Bane's blood sports conquered, Vlad enters the scene. More Crasher is suited perfectly for shotguns, especially the Jocelyn Locomotive variant I was rocking. The flechette Jocelyn was incredible on this one and will certainly be something to consider using in the future. 4 stores was also not much of a problem, even for my pistol build that I decided to transfer to. I even got in some more bow practice as I waited on the van. Overall, a fairly simple time. With what I learned, I took my pistol build to ItsTheMattC to see what I could do about it. The answer? I could get run over by a pair of skulldozers on attempt 1. I then got torn apart twice in about 8 minutes. It's pretty embarrassing given that ItsTheMattC is not a hard heist at all, but on attempt number 4, I decided not to take any stupid risks, escorting Vlad's brother-in-law to the helicopter cleanly and practice some more with the bow before making my getaway. Ukrainian job was thankfully much easier, dispatching all of the guards with ease and getting out of there with the tiara in hand in 4.5 minutes. Up next, however, was the tricky meltdown, where I decided to go with the pronghorn and bow build. While it was perfectly fine in the first stages, the pressure I came under when transporting the warheads proved to be too much on more than one occasion, especially where bulldozers were involved. Third time was the charm, however, as I was able to grind out success, inching my way out of the courtyard and counter-sniping the snipers dotted around the place. After that, I could simply do 2 trips with the Longfellow to deliver the nukes to the train. Only 3 attempts for meltdown was a pretty decent showing. Aftershock is up next, and after an incredible twin javelin at long range on this dozer, this proved to be some good stomping grounds for my shotguns. My poor driving made this closer than it needed to be, but I eventually ground out my success, holding my ground until the helicopter could pick me out. It was off to stealing Xmas next, where I failed in a pretty unique way when I got cuffed by one of the first beat cops in the mall. Pretty sure I'm the first person ever to achieve that. This then led to multiple rapid failures to the beat cops that tore me to shreds in seconds. These are some of the most effective law enforcers in DC when it comes to taking down members of the Payday gang, and the police have them on mall cop duty. It takes 6 failed attempts before I finally get a good run, avoiding the RNG of the tech store of death and managing to hold my own on the roof of the mall before planting the C4 and finishing up the heist. I want to say my luck got better with Nightclub, but no. Whether it be the Titan cameras messing me up or my pure recklessness, this heist is typically easy as pie, but I had 3 messy attempts that just didn't go my way. The 4th run did end up being the one though, and I ended up receiving all of the loot during the completion. The manager's safe, in fact, even had a staggering 8 bags of cocaine inside. I've pumped well over 8,000 hours into this game alone, and I have never seen this happen before. I've seen an instance of it holding 7 one time, but never 8. Maybe it's a sign blessing this run, who knows. Either way, we now switch gears to the Hector trilogy, and I realized during Watch Dogs that I could fire upon the police from inside the closed truck when the units actually spawn in, but only when using sniper rifles. Not that it helped on the first go-around, as I quickly got ripped to pieces. Attempt number 2, I managed to land an amazing blind quad kill before working my way out of the truck with 4 bags of powder. Once I'd hunkered down, there really was nothing that could bring me down, securing the bags and moving on. Day 2 starts much like day 1, with me getting ripped to pieces by the overpowered units that show up at the start. And much like day 1, that was the only hiccup I suffered as I held out with ease, especially with Ilya the sniper going for shooting medals of his own. This lets us move on to Firestarter, and as always, the hard part is just surviving until you can gain a Joker to call your own. I did end up going down under the pressure of a bulldozer, but Feigned Death managed to haul me back to my feet and allowed me to clean up on a typically problematic day of this heist. Day 2 is where things quickly became disastrous. Overconfidence, Titan cameras in the worst possible places, gods spotting open wire boxes from strange angles. This day really had it all. On the 4th go-around, I took things slower and more patiently, with Sydney herself deciding to lighten the mood by going full anime girl when answering a pager. Specifically channeling Vanille from Final Fantasy XIII.
No problem here, Control. Everything is alright.
After that was taken care of, I was able to make it into the server room with little fuss and decided to take the front door to exit with both servers in tow. Day 3 is supposed to be just a standard bank heist and should be as easy as one, but the first attempt had me forget that sniper rifles can penetrate walls. Go figure. The second attempt went marginally better until a double pager situation happened that I couldn't quite salvage. Still, I pressed on in the hopes that just maybe using my archery skills would be enough. Spoiler alert, it wasn't. Attempt number 3 was looking to go the distance quietly until an overzealous civilian saw it as just to run up and hit the alarm button, forcing things loud anyway. At least this time I was geared up with my pronghorn to complement my bow and karate hands. Now that I wasn't tripping over myself, I was able to breach the vault and burn the money before going all Robin Hood on this sniper and making my rapid getaway. All that leaves in Hector's line of jobs is rats, and the sniper build once again gets to shine in some confined spaces to make good use of greys. I thought I'd have to face off with a minigun dozer at one point, but he just didn't want to fight it seems, given that he was perfectly willing to leave the scene of the crime with 4 javelins sticking out from his face. Aside from the dozer ambushes, the cooking went relatively smoothly, and I got out of there with 3 bags of sky blue, without even getting an escape to boot. But when transferring to day 2, the game crashed. It's good to be back. Luckily, day 1 is about as hard as rats can get, so after off-screen grinding my way back to where I was, I simply traded with the Cobras without a fuss, and then speedran day 3. Yep. That is all of the Mendozas on the bus wiped out in 4 shots of the R700. Not often I get to show the full footage of any single day in a heist. We then get introduced to the elephant as we move on to Big Oil. Day 1 is just a simplistic clear out of the 15 bikers on the map, which was simple enough to get done. From there I could simply collect all of the weapons and get the address, moving me on to day 2. Despite some sloppy moments, I was able to keep things quiet until the lab was opened while systematically removing guards from the map. Unlike other times in Payday 2, I decided to do my own science for once without the help of the Big Oil engine guide, and my evidence pointed me to engine 9 being the correct one. By the time things went loud, I was already more than prepared, and my hunch on the engine was correct, meaning I could simply fight until the escape became available. No sweat. Framing Frame, on the other hand, was a much different beast. This one was going to require my stealthing chops, and if the first attempt of day 1 was any indication, this wouldn't be a simple nighttime stroll. Attempt number 2, however, was a lot cleaner, taking out the cams and systematically taking all 9 paintings out of the gallery. Day 2, as always, is a non-event when done successfully, so on to day 3. Attempt number 1 looked promising until I overextended just a touch when getting the last 2 items and causing the classic stealth domino effect with this guard. Attempt 2 went smoother, getting to the point where I was ready to move the coke down to the bedroom vault, but that ended up being foiled by a combination of a guard and camera that wasn't tagged by my spy cam. The backloaded nature of Framing Frame really does rear its ugly head here, as one event happening at just the wrong time can be the linchpin to undo so much hard work in an instant. Finally, on attempt number 4, I pulled it together, getting everything set up at pace and only being caught out once by a guard in the stairwell. Otherwise, it was a clean-cut mission. But guess what? Olympics fact number 3. Did you know that each gold medal in the Olympics uses around 6 grams of gold plating? Payday 2's baggable gold loot comes in packs of 8 bars, totaling in at around 240 ounces according to their models. Considering that the senator involved in Framing Frame's plot has 8 stacks of 8 gold bars, this would mean he'd have enough gold to play over 9,000 Olympic gold medals. Of course, because I don't want to ruin a good run, I'm not going to risk getting that gold for myself, and will instead just cut my losses and leave. Maybe some other time. No point dwelling on the missed opportunity though, because Election Day is upon us next. And compared to the Alphabet run, where I decided to go at things in loud owing to being on overkill difficulty, I decided to show some guile and tag the correct truck on day 1 to head to the actual day 2. After getting jump scared by a beat cop, the process of getting a crowbar and opening up the crates with the machines one by one was surprisingly straightforward. It only became a problem when trying to find the last machine I needed and needing to save a double pager scramble without being seen, which I just about managed. Using up all pages like that meant that the final stages were down to the wire, but I kept my cool and got it done, working my way out of the complex and securing a bag of money as well as the bonus gold from the elephant. Told you dwelling on the Framing Frame gold wouldn't do any good. The run starts to ramp up with the introduction of the dentist and Big Bank, and I didn't fancy doing this one stealthily on Death Wish, so it's time to bring out the shotguns again. Attempt number 1 looked to be going the distance until a swarm of cops took me by surprise around the thermite, but the second go around goes much smoother. I also love the good range on the shotguns, and I'm more appreciative of the flechette strat. Why am I bringing this up? Well, I think that calls for Olympics fact number 4. In Olympic trap shooting, the distance to targets can range anywhere between 60 and 76 meters away from the shooter's position. Payday 2 shotguns may be classed as diesel abominations for their effectiveness over range, but perhaps this means that they're truer to text than most other video games' interpretations. The cops on the upper balconies provided the perfect shooting gallery, dozers offered themselves up for javelin bullseyes, and shields met the business end of my padded gloves. Before long, the vault was breached and 4 bags of money were being pulled out, with another javelin each inscribed for the heads of 2 more bulldozers. All in all, only 2 tries needed for Big Bank is fortunate, which is luck I'm going to need going into the next dentist job, Hotline Miami. This one basically involves a race against the clock to get as much done as possible before the snipers start to spawn in. I managed to take down the mobsters and just about get to the gas pump objective when the snipers do start spawning, requiring me to hunker down and deal with them and another bulldozer. Thankfully, once they were repelled, it was simple enough, with my victory more or less assured when I drop into the basement, given that the cops are being forced to come to me as opposed to being in the line of sight of snipers. With that, I got the address cleanly and moved on to day 2. My 100-meter sprint skills were really put to the test in the sprawling apartment maze, but I met a hurdle that I wasn't ready for when a skulldozer appeared next to the power box and took 2 javelins to the face without flinching. Needless to say, I wasn't able to handle that. Thankfully, on day 2, I avoided his presence and made it all the way to the penthouse, avoiding being mauled to death in the process of repelling the cops and mobsters up there. The close quarters nature of this heist made it ideal for me, with Grace putting in a lot of work. Though I'll admit I ate up far more first aid reserves than I would have liked, but otherwise I was more than capable of holding out until it was time to face the Commissar. Now it's time for Olympics fact number 5. In the 1920 Olympic Games in Antwerp, Belgium, US boxer Samuel Mosberg got the fastest recorded knockout in Olympic boxing history, KOing South African Richard Belland in a matter of seconds in the first round. While I don't know if there's any specific amount of time it took, I imagine it couldn't have been any longer than the Commissar was able to hold out against me, in spite of him bringing a gun to my boxing match. With him down for the count, my victory on this heist was assured. Hoxton Breakout would prove to be a much different test, owing to it starting as an open romp through the streets of DC, and it really is determined by how much resistance I faced at the beginning. Too many bulldozers at once, and it's effectively game over. The compound bow may not be all that fast an option compared to my pistol, but if there's one place it shines above all other options, it's the ability to disable SWAT van turrets with ease, and counter-sniping clueless snipers. Eventually I make my way into the underground car park where I take this big guy by surprise, and hold out until I can make my way into the second day at the FBI headquarters. Day 2 is only really a threat at the start, owing to the devastating FBI units and their pistols. Once I converted one of them to my way of thinking and get settled in, it's not all that bad. Towards the end I did start to struggle, requiring feign death and guzzling down more FAKs than I would have liked just to keep things going amidst the carnage around me. But I forged on, completed all objectives, and lugged the master server to the end. Now that's a hard-fought victory. Hoxton Revenge, the end of the Hoxton saga, is usually a heist I have bad luck on in past runs. But this one was a surprisingly good first-time victory in the end, systematically taking out the camera operator and 2 roaming guards, as well as getting the retinal scan done with little fuss on the FBI boss's part. Using that and the 2 keycards to open up the panic room and delivering the knockout blow to Hector. From there, I just did a whole loads of backwards and forwardsing to get all 8 pieces of evidence out of there, which was only really possible due to them being packed in the same area of the mansion. Overall, a fairly solid victory. The Diamond, likewise, is another simplistic heist at its core. I did get caught out at some fairly inopportune moments from various guards, but the overall flow of the heist went rather well, dispatching the cameras and getting the keycards I needed as I worked my way to the inner sanctum. There was a moment in there where I thought the attempt would be cut short by this guard who I thought would be spotted, but the other 2 guards in the area weren't attentive enough to see it, allowing me to bag his body and take it with me into the Chamber of the Diamond. From there, I simply messed with the panel until I got a simplistic enough pattern, secured the diamond in the bagman window, and booked it for the van. All that leaves to round out the dentist's jobs is the Golden Grin Casino, and this was where I started to fumble a little bit when it came to dealing with the back of this building. It's really telling just how much of a difference something like the indestructible Titan cameras can make when it comes to the success factor of a heist, or even just a particularly observant person. It takes attempt number 5 before I can actually get momentum behind me, working my way around the casino, getting the code fragments and all the other various pieces of intel I needed, and just about saving the situation with this impressive toss. Before long, I had the keycard in hand, and a closer encounter than I would have liked, which made me fear that the run would now be timed once I opened up the Golden Grin Vault. But, surprisingly, no. The guards that had usually come around this point just never showed up, meaning I was uncontested to walk the dentist's toy box out of the vault and into the van. Works for me, as we now see to the butcher for the bomb dockyard. The first run had a minor hiccup owing to a stealth domino effect, but the second crack at it goes much smoother, working my way through objectives and getting the Moretta moving in around 8 minutes. I did alert this guy that fired as he was karate chopped to death, but thankfully nobody was around to hear it, so I could move on to the ship and boost the bomb pieces out of there without any more problems. But if there was any heist that could give me problems when doing it quietly, which would be how I'd prefer things right now, it'd be none other than Scarface Mansion. With the number of guards patrolling outside and the tight corridors of the inside, this was not going to be an easy one, and the first attempt really set the tone for what was to come. If it wasn't an inopportune set of guards that'd mess up an attempt, it'd be a Titan camera overlooking a high traffic area that'd do me in. Probably the attempt that hurt the most was the second to last one, where I made it all the way through quietly. Even though I had wasted all 4 pages in a mad scramble, all seemed to go well as I flanked into the inner sanctum and ended Sosa with an arrow to the gut. But in the process of moving the loot, one of the inner guards seemed to spot a body bag that I'd failed to clean up, sending the heist loud and ruining the entire attempt. That one hurt, but the run back proved to be just as big a success as last time, making sure to actually clean up my messes properly on this go around. This time, one shot from the pronghorn was enough to do the deed. From there, I started moving 6 bags of yayo and channeling Turkey's Yusuf Dicek as I dispatched the remaining courtyard thugs by hip-firing my pronghorn until they all dropped. With them unable to leave a spanner in the works, I could secure the goods and make it out of there at long last. It was time to switch gears to 20 levels of Crime Spree, which I decided to handle differently than usual. Rather than buying the spree at level 20 and completing a single heist, I'd start from a level of 0 and work my way to the 20 mark legitimately. That way, it was more impressive. Beneath the Mountain was where I dropped myself off first, but even the brief downturn to overkill difficulty did little to offset the challenges awaiting for me against the Murky Water forces. I ate up far too many first aid kits inside the complex as everyone was swarming me, but despite all of the odds, I made it all the way through to the helicopter fueling objective where I did the unthinkable. I got a burst of speed on the roof, slipped over the stair railing, and fell to my demise. It wasn't even the manner in which I failed that hurt the most, it was the 15.5 minutes of struggle that vanished into the ether over one minor mistake. Figuring that this was the worst possible heist to start Crime Spree on, I promptly ditched that spree and started another on Breaking Ballot, which suited my setup much better on the balance of everything. Snipers were the only real concern to face, but otherwise it was a fairly simple mission clear in the end. Then I followed that up with an engine problem to push me to the 20 mark. While this one wasn't as clean-cut a success as the first go-around earlier on, that did little to slow my roll as I could simply enjoy popping heads with the pronghorn and overall asserting my dominance, with my victory being assured before long. It was now time to settle things down in Florida with Counterfeit, and I think a lapse of concentration caused me to mask up far earlier than I should have. Despite that blunder, I was able to keep things fairly quiet and got a decent position into the heist until a combination of beat cops and regular units brought me down. Attempt number 2, and I kept it in my pants this time, which gave me that head start I needed to get a good grip on things for this heist. Hardly anything slowed me down for long, and before I knew it, I was blowing the safe open and grabbing the printing plates. I did have a bit of a scuffle with the Skulldozer in the sewers, but a pair of javelins and circle strats allowed me to come out on top and secure my escape. I wish I could say things were straightforward with First World Bank, but the general mood of things at the moment is that the hard things are easy and the easy things are hard. And this heist went that way if the first attempt is any indication. I mean, this 40 health security guard survived a hit from a pistol that does at least 55 damage. Make that make sense. From there, the floodgates of failure were opened, including a particularly prickly failure with this guard spotting me right in front of a camera as I was preparing to make my silent getaway. Finally, on attempt number 6, it wasn't a complete disaster for a change, silently infiltrating the vault, dispatching all that would have spotted me, and gathering the required money bags and making my silent escape through the offices. It didn't technically end silently, as the alarm did go off as I was securing the final loot bag, but unlike other failures of this ilk, this was at least done at the very end of the heist, so it wasn't as if that was going to severely impact the outcome. The next heist on the agenda is Murky Station, the first of the Jimmy duology, and unlike First World Bank before it, this one wasn't too stressful in the end. Sure, it did take a fair bit to locate the other half of the EMP bomb, but I was relatively uncontested throughout it, whereas the First World Bank run seemed to throw complications at every turn. 5 minutes and 20 seconds on the clock, and that was that. EMP secured, heist completed, and no bloodshed to boot. But I wasn't about to start thinking that things would stay so easy with what was about to hit me. Boiling Point is about as demanding as it can get, and given its balked difficulty scaling on the higher ends, it might as well have been done on death sentence. The high-power mercenaries are the primary problem, and in the opening half of the heist, the fights take place in open spaces with very little in the ways of cover. So, without sufficient help from jokers or my weapons, I'm prone to getting torn to pieces. Even when entering into the close quarters factory section, there are events that would leave me prone to getting overrun, not least the possibility of a ceiling turret. Much like Hoxton Breakout, too many dozers at once too quickly and things quickly fall apart. On around the 4th attempt, I had been getting feign-deafed back to my feet all the way towards going into custody following a brutal outdoor battle, but I was able to use my javelins to forge my path into the factory. Ammo soon ran out in the struggle, requiring me to rely on the bow to keep the run afloat as I farmed for bullets. I also tried to use the bow to take out the ceiling turret for my escape, but I ended up running out of first aid kits entirely, forcing me to book it past it instead. In spite of my best efforts to thin out the dozer squad waiting for me up top, I soon got picked off and naturally I didn't stand back up. With that, it was time to swap tactics to the pistol build. 2 rapid-fire failures should give an indication as to how that went. So I rolled the dice on the third and final route I could take. The shotgun build. And to say it made the difference in the end is a massive understatement. Or at least it would if I remember to actually equip the damn build. It was true that it didn't guarantee success, as the dozer ambush at the underground entrance and the lack of feign death on the subsequent 2 runs proved, but it was significantly easier than the runs with the sniper rifle or pistol. This was the way to go. So with attempt number 11 on the cards, I locked in, utilizing my Jocelyn for long-range targets and the Loco up close. This was clearly needing to be less graceful gymnastics and more brutal taekwondo. Taking things slowly around the underground entrance so as not to get flattened by the welcoming committee, I baited the dozers lying in wait into a charge and then juked my way into the facility. Getting inside did necessitate another feign death activation, but my javelins were more than sharp enough to deal with the dozer onslaught. With the ceiling turret over the scanner gone, it was now time to fight. And fight I did, all the way until I got my hands on the master server. And now it was time to make my escape. Despite the fact that the tour guides up top weren't as meaty as the last few times, it was still pretty tense. But once out into the open air again, my Jocelyn could pick off the various snipers spawning in to help secure my sprint to victory. That was a bloody and brutal heist, but it was finally behind me, so that gives me hope for everything coming up. Santa's workshop provides a sort of wind down for the post-Boiling Point shenanigans. And surprisingly, it was a first time clear, which is unheard of for me given how brutal this heist tends to get. I guess I could attribute that to the sheer power and reliability of the shotgun build. It's not like it was a walk in the park, because duh, no it wasn't. But unlike some previous runs, I was able to keep my head above water and provide the firepower to keep my opposition at bay, scrambling the minimum 4 bags to the chimney and making a hasty getaway. Car Shop is the kind of reprieve I can appreciate, knowing what comes before and after it in the career mode, and thankfully, no matter the difficulty, it's a fairly simplistic job. Helps that the manager just wandered right into my arms to help speed things along. I only needed 1 TKO on the way out, and I was able to drive the Falco Genie all the way to the storage crates. Makes me wonder if car races will ever become an Olympic sport. Well, we have no time to ponder that hypothetical, as up next is the dreaded biker heist. The next great roadblock in the run. Or so I thought. I was going into this expecting to be stuck here for quite some time. Biker heist is not one of the easier ones after all, but somehow everything just seemed to fall into place. First, the mechanic's truck was on the far side away from the workshop, meaning I wouldn't be forced to deal with a SWAT turret and I could defend Mike from the safety of the clubhouse. Then, the next objective was the seat, which is much easier to do when there aren't a million snipers dotted around the area. The cola objective could have caused issues, but my sheer speed simply prevented that from happening. The last objective was the Chrome Skull, and that was a simple indoors holdout. Before long, I had cleared out any opposing snipers on my path, and I could leave on Rust's bike onto day 2, where I knew things were going to be less problematic overall. Within 1 minute, I had forged my way to the front of the train, where the biker boss became the obstacle impeding me. Being able to take 3 javelins to the head like it's nothing can do that to you, I suppose. But after a brief intermission to get a joker, I finally brought her down and grabbed the BCI helmet. One frantic rush back down the train later, I thought I'd be cut down owing to the ambush squad being backed up by a chopper sniper. But feign death was the only thing I needed to secure my victory. And what a victory it was. Panic Room was going to be a much different test, however. Not least because of the fact that the gangsters that Chavez rolls with can pack more of a punch than most armed officers in the Washington area. Which says a lot, really. Unsurprisingly, when I get clipped by a beat cop, it promptly ends attempt number 1. The gangsters end up doing me in multiple times before I can finally get a bit of momentum going, cranking my way through the assault as the saws did their thing until I made it up to the roof for the sniper objective. Hilariously, some of the thugs I had left alive prior had taken to giving me an unexpected boost in this, but no amount of thug assistance or deft javelin tosses would have made a difference in the end, foiled by a gauge package of all things. On attempt number 6, I discovered that the ladder on the side of the building wasn't just set dressing and that I could actually climb it to make it all the way to the roof in one go. You really do learn something new every day. Grace carried me all the way through the saws and I could bat my way through the snipers with relatively little trouble, though the C4 objective would have done me in if not for a clutch activation of feigned death. With the signs clearly in place, I got to work planting the C4 and prepared for the final stages of the heist. Continuing to ride my luck with feigned death going off again, all I could do is wait for Bile to do his thing. As for the defense of the roof itself, I simply went to the surface level and waited for the roof to clear out on its own. It's cowardly, but it gets results. Before long, Bile's weightlifting the panic room out of the building and I can sneak into the sewers more or less unopposed. Before I could crack my knuckles and take on Brooklyn 1010, however, I ended up receiving a call from the Heisting Olympic Association via ItsTheMattC, informing me that I acted dumb and broke the sanctity of Olympic specification via my shotguns. So, inadvertent Olympics fact number 6. As it turns out, Olympic trap shooting, which is where my shotgun expertise lay, does not allow pump-action shotguns, which every shotgun I used bar the Jocelyn fell under. While they were not prepared to outright disqualify my run owing to it being an honest cock-up, there was a clear choice that needed to be made. Either I redo all of the heists I used those pump actions on without using them, including the likes of Boiling Point and Biker Heist, or ban myself from shotguns for the rest of the run, with the likes of Heat Street, Green Bridge and Hell's Island still to come. It was a tough call, but I decided that redeeming myself on 9 heists was more preferable than punishing myself for 18. So I binned my pump actions and stocked up on different shotgun types, adding the Breaker 12 gauge, Moscone, Claire and VD12 to fill the gaps left behind by my illegal weaponry. Deciding to tackle the runbacks in order, Transport Park was the first to go. Since I've already done these heists, I won't dwell on them too much unless something interesting happens. The VD12 may be stretching it in terms of legality in this run, but at least it's a 12 gauge and non-pump, so it should work. Even the cops were getting in on the Olympic action, with this guy doing an impressive starfish-like cartwheel for 10 or so feet. Honestly, 7 out of 10, he nearly stuck the landing. No real issues from the park run in the end, 5 bags secured, all is well. The train heist, however, wasn't as straightforward. The Flechette Breaker may have been as effective as the GSPS was on the first go-around, but one wrong jump can send you careening off of the bridge and straight to your doom. Or you can be flanked and overrun easily. On attempt number 4, I managed to actually pull it together, grinding out a successful and bloody run. I'm at least grateful I got the truck escape, as it made ferrying the turret parts via zipline a piece of cake. Minigun dozers could still do me a frighten, but the ammo caches were all closer to the truck, so it was easier to ferry them to the pickup one by one. Slow and tedious, but I managed to make it with 4 reserves of healing still in the tank, so it was relatively successful in the end. Mall Crasher is one I needed 2 attempts for, though the failure wasn't to do with anything the heist did. Rather, this cheeky beat cop ducked my left jab and decided to cuff me. I'm probably the first person ever to achieve being cuffed like this on Mall Crasher. Thankfully, it only required one more go to get the job done, getting the initial pieces of damage done in stealth before wrecking all in my sight further into the mall. Nothing much to go over, just a very simple clear in the end. I think one of the snipers spawning in clipped me right at the end, but at that point it was too little too late. Next is Aftershock, which I decided to use a short Moscone in tandem with a longer Claire. A green bulldozer put an end to run 1 when he blasted me down in just 2 pumps, before I decided to lose all sense and just plummet off the overpass on run 2. Third time's the charm though, as I discovered I could phase myself through one of the trucks I was sent to breach, before using my Flechette Claire to thin out the overwatching snipers and a rogue bulldozer. With that, I could load the saves into the truck and begin the final holdout, standing my ground outside the construction yard while eating through all of my first aid reserves. It was tough for sure, but I held firm before jumping into the truck at the first chance I got. Big Bank's run back was actually looking pretty solid. I had breached the vault and got the loot I needed, albeit taking longer due to me forgetting to take the keys before entering the vault. Sometimes though, the game gives your run no choice but to die, as it decided to guard my way out with a pair of minigun dozers. Worse still, I was about to deal the death blow to one of them, but a shield marshal took the crucial javelin needed, and he proceeded to bring me down with his burst mode, wasting a solid 21-minute attempt. Enraged and disappointed, I switched out to the VD12 and went at it again. I think I was a lot more proactive against those damn shield marshals this time around, given that I wouldn't have wanted them to ruin another attempt. Before long, I was in the vault and moving 4 bags of the money to the lift again. Another pair of dozers did try to halt me again, but these ones were green boys, so I could take them out quickly before they could be a nuisance. That proved to be the deciding factor in the end, taking another redemption round off the list. Counterfeit is next to go, and I really treated this the same way I did the original. The only adaptation was the usage of the Flechette Claire in tandem with a short buckshot breaker. Dealing with minigun dozers from across an entire street is not ideal, but with my Flechette Claire acting as my long-range option, I'm able to whittle him down before long. After he was dealt with, it was simple enough to hold out until I could grab the printing plates from the safe, and once I was done punching the shield blockade to death, I could one-shot the skulldozer lying in wait for me with a javelin and escape through the sewer uncontested. I even got infamy level 96 from this heist, granting me the general's outfit. Not a bad haul. Sadly, the mood had to be brought down as up next was Boiling Point. I had the correct strategy on lock at this point, but it wouldn't guarantee success. Case in point, the first run ended when I breached the wall, only to be met by a stalwart Russian dozer that somehow tanked the blast like it was nothing, which I just wasn't ready for. After a botched run 2 where things fell apart after only 30 seconds, I finally got a run worth talking about. This time I was using a short buckshot Claire with a long flechette Mosconi, and it really was ideal for dealing with those high damage mercenaries. Once the wall was down, I made sure to drop the bulldozer, who thankfully wasn't stood up at the time, before making it through to storming the factory. Thankfully, there were no ceiling turrets to worry about, meaning I could scan a super soldier, grab the master server, and make a run for it. Curiously, I was actually ready for a fight after making it up the stairs to the surface, but found that there was literally nobody lying in wait to ambush me, not even a sniper at the window. Confused at the sheer lack of planning on the enemy's part, I wasted no time shuffling my way out of the facility, picking off the scripted snipers with my Mosconi, and finally putting this meat grinder of a heist behind me. Santa's workshop was pretty ruthless in its approach, not least because of the beat cops that almost brought me down early on, and tried to brute force the end of my run when it decided to drop 2 minigun dozers in front of me again. Thanks to the powers of Feign Def and pointy sticks, however, I was eventually able to pick them both off. Despite just how ruthless this heist was, I was able to scramble 4 cokes into the chimney and grabbed a 5th on the way out. All that leaves in the redemption round is the biker heist, and oh boy, did it not go anywhere near as smoothly as the original go-around. Run 1 saw me have the truck spawn in front of the warehouse, meaning I had to deal with a deadly automatic turret, and the thing inside the SWAT van too. Unsurprisingly, a taser put an end to the attempt after taking a javelin meant for the machine. Run 2 was ended by a skulldozer. Run 3 had a bit of a momentum going at long last, but left me sprawling after eating a sniper round following the Chrome Skull holdout. Run 4 was put to an end by another skulldozer just 2 minutes in, but at least that one ended in mutually assured destruction. And Run 5 gave me the worst possible objective inside the garage, which I was not in a position to salvage. Thwarted by a taser that my 2 jokers just didn't bother to target. Run number 6 proved to be the one though, with a VD-12 in hand and some hard-fought determination. I got the seat first, which was good as I'd prefer to do that without sniper lasers trained on my position, but then got it balanced out by the special parts objective, which was brutal, but at least it was doable this time around. From there I could hold out successfully until I got rid of all snipers overwatching the escape and rode off on Rust's bike, effectively securing the heist in my favour. Day 2 saw me punch a flashbang so hard it exploded, which was then immediately followed up by a Feign Def activation against this chopper sniper. The biker boss was straightforward enough, 3 javelins followed by basically every shot from my breaker, and a final hit from my super shorty finished her off. And I got Feign Def'd back to my feet again after a bulldozer shot me down to race back to the end of the train with the BCI helmet in tow. That's the redemptions complete, so now it's time to get back on track. Brooklyn 1010 is exactly the antidote I needed to take a break from the shotgunner mindset. Especially liberating considering that I can actually fight back without the fear of having to restart if I miss too many times. That said, the jump to Death Wish means that the swarms of cops inside the cramped apartment spaces can make short work of me and make it difficult to press the objectives. While I did manage to make it all the way to street level on the first attempt, I ended up getting flanked and overwhelmed at just the wrong moment before we could start the escape sequence. A hard one to take, especially since Run 2 was even more brutal than the last, but I was able to hold out until I could get back to where I was. Once I was at the final area, I could hold out against New York's finest with Greys and managed to move the cop cars before making a desperate escape. Only 2 tries for this heist is pretty good performance. The yacht heist, comparatively, is much more straightforward. It can be tricky to navigate if you're not familiar with this place, but through diligence and patience, I was able to secure all 8 money bundles without any bloodshed, meaning I was uncontested in the final area to nab the server and make it out at the first time of asking. Next up was Undercover, which really should have been a cakewalk with my current setup. Corridors with grey sightlines should have been great for the sniper build. Unfortunately, it was my performance in this heist with such a setup that made me notice that the sniper build was starting to fall off a bit in terms of performance. After 2 less than impressive runs, I decided to pivot back to the shotgun build. Not that it made things that much easier on the balance of things. In one particularly crushing run, I thought I ended up sequence breaking things when the computer seemed to outright skip the 3rd hack, But after 4 minutes of waiting, the escape didn't open up even after Bane had seemingly confirmed the transaction. Even getting the power back on and restarting the PC didn't seem to fix anything, forcing a restart out of me. Finally, after 5 failed attempts at a typically easy enough heist, luck finally went my way as I was able to successfully hold out with the taxman without a single interruption, holding the bottom room until I could finish the hack and scramble my way to safety. Unfortunately, immediately after that was Slaughterhouse, which in itself is just a really tough heist without the right combination of approach and luck. From the bulldozer in the truck to the sporadic cover that the Slaughterhouse itself provides, this was proving to be a real roadblock. Even though I was able to get to the gold moving section on the first 2 attempts, having to race against the clock before the snipers spawned in meant that I eventually had to go down under pressure. At one point I experimented with the pistol build as well as an adjusted sniper build in hopes that I'd find solutions there, but those also came up blank. After those failed attempts, I decided that I needed to adjust my shotgun build for the late game, dropping high value target and shotgun or aced in favour of hostage taker. The idea was to give myself some bigger sustainability so that I wouldn't be eating first aid kits like it's going out of fashion. While the first attempt at this new strategy was thwarted by a rogue skulldozer, the second go around proved to be an inexplicable success, moving the gold in sets of 3, 3 and then 2 so as to limit the amount of snipers I had to contend with. I'll freely admit that the experiment wasn't completely foolproof as I couldn't contend with shields regularly anymore, but I was just about able to come out on top in the enormous scuffles. But even hostage taker aced could only do so much to sustain me in those heated fights. The cops doing voodoo by grabbing bags through containers didn't help. Eventually though, I did manage to get the gold into the container, but rather than hide in the slaughterhouse like a sane person, I decided for whatever reason that I couldn't just leave the construction yard, resulting in me wasting all of my remaining first aid kits in the struggle. Hunkering down and hiding near the blue container, all I could do was hold the line as ammo started to run out in the skirmish. And once the blue container opened, I wasted no time sprinting through the escape zone, which was completely empty. With 3.5 hours down and only 4 heists done, I'll gladly take it. At least we're approaching endgame as Locke steps in for Beneath the Mountain. After encountering an indoor layout that I don't ever remember seeing for this heist, I used my Grace prowess to hold the security room and prove my sniping chops. Unfortunately, I soon learned that the real snipers around these parts are the skulldozers in the inner sanctum, and while I got a little further on the next go around, I still ended up swarmed and overwhelmed at a crucial moment. 3rd time's the charm though, as I could use the bow to take down the aggressive skulldozer lying in wait for me, then one-shotting another with a javelin. From there, I could loot the Zeus and Poseidon vaults and make it to the final third of the heist, where I could ammo back up and deal with the satellite dishes. I'll admit I was a little nervous as I was just hiding from all of the dozers and snipers, but I would eventually make my escape after a tense holdout. I thought bringing a sniper rifle along for Birth of Sky would make sense. Not that I'd know on the first go around, but on the second go, I was able to make it into the sewer escape, and was promptly overran by the enormous swarms of cops and skulldozers. After a 3rd failure, where I was too busy turning a bulldozer into a pincushion to notice what was behind me, I decided to switch back to the shotgun build. Aside from the first attempt at it, it did seem to be making the difference as I was making it further each time. Unfortunately, it wasn't the snipers doing me in, it was of course the sewer escape, which simply isn't doable on Death Wish if you don't have the means to kill hordes of enemies at once reliably. After a few attempts going nowhere, I decided to pivot back to the sniper build, this time with the R700 in hopes that would make a difference. At first it didn't seem to, but finally on attempt number 8 of this heist, the sewer escape went off brilliantly. First of all, I didn't have a dozer to deal with in the first section, which meant that things were manageable in the opening stages. Then I saw a skulldozer lying in wait around the corner from the first grate, which I baited into a charge before darting past it and through the crowds to the second grate. From there, Grace kept me going until I could jump into the boat and make my getaway at long last. Although I definitely trusted my legwork more than the boat after I was in the clear. That moves us on to Heat Street, which had the customary failure owing to the swarms of beat cops at the first corner, though it did lead to this funnily appropriate moment. After that though, it went off fairly smoothly in the end, making the run to the crash site with basically no real resistance and holding out until Matt Roscoe felt comfortable about not being burnt to a crisp. Barely anything slowed us down through the trip through the streets of New York, and thanks to the timing of the assault waves, I could defend the pickup zone as it was just ramping up, meaning the final holdout was over in a matter of seconds. Only 2 tries for Heat Street is not bad odds really. Green Bridge, on the other hand, was a different beast altogether. The ponytail prison guards having a buff to their health is annoying, but at least it could be used to my advantage in the opening throws of this heist. It's not really worth going over every single attempt here because they mostly just play out the same. If it's not me getting brought down by a powerful deluge of specials, it's me getting knocked down early by beat cops of Broncos in the opening 2 minutes. If Garrett and his boys really wanted to get rid of CrimeNet so badly, he should have just given all of the police units Broncos. The Payday gang would have been doomed. After failing again with the pistol build, which really isn't doing anything for me anymore at this point, I decided on attempt number 10 to bust out a weapon that I left unused during the redemption round. The Argos 3 shotgun. Paired with a super short breaker, this unsung option proved to be the game changer. Being a fast yet decently powerful shotgun, I could use it on regular enemies and leave my breaker for higher health specials. The fact that it could reload 2 shells a pop didn't hurt either. Finding the prisoner in only the second truck I opened, it was practically trivial to keep him moving until I could get him into the hot seat. The ensuing holdout was as tense as it got, not helped by the pilot missing the payload on the first attempt. He managed to pick it up shortly afterwards though, and after a bulldozer got right up in my face to try and get my autograph, I decided that the only way through this was to just hoof it. An inexplicable clear and a certified W for the oft-overlooked Argos 3. What a feeling. Compared to the 2 heists I just had to fight through, Alaskan Deal was significantly easier, even if the holdouts felt more brutal. This heist threw more bulldozers at me than it really knew what to do with, but through determination and feigned death, I was able to get a foothold on proceedings. After about 9 minutes of fighting, I was able to refuel the ship, leading on to the final fight on the boat itself. Dealing with dozers was frightening, but with my R700, I could at least wallbang my shots to take them out from in cover. Once they were down, it wasn't long before our escape was assured. After a lot of brutal combat, a stealth heist like Diamond Heist was just the antidote I needed to slow things down a bit. On the first attempt, things looked to be going well, until I overextended just a little too much while securing the diamonds, failing agonizingly close to the escape. Thankfully though, it only took one more try to break through this one, taking part in the usual blatant disregard for Payday's continuity before getting the code fragments I needed to enter the vault. From there, I took out the security officer and thinned out the guard numbers that patrolled near to where I'd be making my extractions, all the while making sure to grab the diamonds and haul them to the window washing platform. Before long, all 8 sets of diamonds were in my possession, and I could move on to the final batch of heists as the fight against the Kataru starts to take shape, starting with Reservoir Dogs. The first part of the heist that takes place at the warehouse was not my primary concern. It could be if I let snipers fester, but if I kept things moving, then all would be fine. Mr. Pink was easy enough to move to safety, owing to him crashing his car very close by, and I only needed to saw one shutter before I could get my hands on the diamonds. That soon left the escape, which meant that it was time for the brutal fight at the jewelry store. The initial stages expect me to take out a scripted multi-dozer or multi-beat cop ambush all by myself. Thankfully, this one seemed to be more beat cop than bulldozer, so I could fend it off. But as the assault began, it quickly became apparent that this wouldn't be an easy feat regardless. One brutal siege in the employee lounge later, and I was able to reach the vault and start the drilling and liquid nitrogen process. Before long, I was into the vault and ready to start hauling the diamonds out to Mr. Blonde's car. I did have a few close calls here and there, but against all odds, I was able to secure the diamonds and make my escape without any further incidents. How the times have changed, as we've gone from floundering around an undercover in Birth of Sky to first time clearing the usually difficult Reservoir Dogs. Except now we've lost Bane as our coach, instead replaced for the rest of the journey by Locke. Locke sends us first to Brooklyn Bank, which is simply little more than some stomping grounds for the Bo Pronghorn build. Helps that I got the thermal drill as my breaching tool, so after I went down after a minigun dozer blocked my way to the vault, I simply got feigned deft to my feet and flanked around him instead. Outside of the occasional dozer, this wasn't all that hard in the end, getting the medallion of Perseids and making a break for it into the sewers as the assault died down. Up next was the usually problematic breaking feds, a heist that usually gives me a lot of trouble. But, remarkably, this was a first time clear, albeit a long-winded one. Even more surprising, given my breakneck start to the whole ordeal. Making sure to KO the camera guard, I had to work out the right code, which ultimately took 3 goes around before I could get it right. Thankfully, on that third attempt, it worked, as Garrett still hasn't learned his lesson about making 1234 his goddamn password. After a closer encounter with him than I would have liked, it was then just a matter of waiting for my opening to bring the elephant's coffer back to the starting point, and make a silent getaway for an incredibly difficult stealth-only caper. But that just threw me straight into the jaws of the shark, as up next was Henry's Rock. No matter which way you shake it, this heist is just difficult. There were times where I could get decently far into it before being cut down, and others where it crumbled to pieces within a minute. After a handful of attempts, I decided to whip out the Argos 3 breaker combo in hopes that this would alleviate my worries. It took a few goes around with it before I finally got the run to win it all. It did seem like it was going to fall apart when I got the weapons lab objective, which is usually torture enough by yourself, but I was able to weather the storm and blast through the door to reach through to the first box. Next was the comparatively easier archaeology lab, where the code was easy enough to find out. All that was left was the final holdout at the helipad, where I only received 1 interruption before I could shut down the turret and wait for Bile to land. All things considered, this ran down to the wire as the assault fired back up again, but I was able to beat the heat and secured both of the coffers with no slices of healing left and no ammo in my Argos shotgun. But that should hopefully be the final hard heist out of the way now. Shacklethorn Auction is the last regular stealth heist before the final challenge, and it's a pretty big doozy, especially if you get caught out at just the wrong moment. After a crash stopped the second attempt in its tracks, I ended with a slew of attempts where I was either caught in front of a camera or by a guard after wasting all of my pages. On the proper attempt number 5 though, I was eventually able to get a grip, clearing out the vault area of any obstacles and securing a set of artifacts to get the zip line up faster. From there I could get the auctioneer's keycard through some simple murder, got the code for the vault, and extracted the tablet before making my getaway. That was a rough journey, but at least we were on the final sprint to the finish line. Hell's Island was the final hurrah for the shotgun build that I had spent a long time redeeming them for. Of course, the first 2 attempts were cut short before I could really make it to the final hard portion of the run, but third time's the charm, and I sure as hell made it count. The holdout around the locked gate could have been too much for the run to handle, but once I was able to weather the assault and thin out the number of special units, I could grab the keys and break through the sprint to the roof for the final assault. I thought the part where I needed to rack up kills could have been an issue owing to the sheer volume of special Murkies trying to ruin things, but I could still keep things moving easily enough. From there, it was 1 final minute-long hack before I could get to the helipad with Locke and Bane in tow and escape this brutal heist with a little over 10 seconds to spare. With only 2 more heists to go, it's time to go back in time. A time even before the London Olympics in 2012 were a thing, as it's No Mercy we need to tackle next. Hey, guess what? Olympics fact number 7. Did you know that Olympic swimmer Michael Phelps has a shoe size of 14? Well, by that logic, and given the heist we're playing as, with a foot that big, we should be more than capable of kicking some serious ass, much like what I'm about to inflict upon Mercy Hospital. The sniper build may not have been as good for the later stages of this heist as I would have liked, but here in the tight hospital corridors, this was the ideal send-off for the R700. Once the initial wave of beat cops were cut down, it was simple enough to just have fun popping heads en masse and just enjoy this weapon for the final time on this challenge run. The only real issue I had was that by the time I made it through to the correct patient, I only had 1 first aid kit remaining, so I was really banking on Hostage Taker and my final medic bag asset charge to hold this run together. But I was not afraid. I was powerful enough to make groups of cops disappear into thin air at this point, so all I had to do was stand my ground. I eventually managed to hold out until the lift could arrive, grabbing my final few kills in the process and eventually escaping through the morgue. 550 kills and an accuracy count in the 90s is a sign of a good time. But all good times must come to an end as we have the final challenge on our hands before we can close our Olympics journey. The White House. Even as a stealth caper, I was not expecting this to be an easy one. The traffic around the Oval Office was the real problem here, as more often than not, the population density of the guards made it almost impossible to travel the area without at least one running headlong into me. After 4 failed attempts and a 5th that was aborted by another inopportune crash, I only had 1 more failed run before I finally got the magical run I needed, which I wasn't aware of at first given the awful start I ended up having with this guy spotting me early on. Working through the West Wing, I did end up getting caught out once more, but could safely get rid of the evidence before eventually finding the code and opening the POX safe. The only real issue here is that, unlike past runs, I couldn't just take control of the place, so I'd need to be on my A game here. The POC was a fairly tense time as I effectively had to play a game of Frogger with the trio of guards I had to contend with, and one did end up spotting me during the final hack, but no backup was deployed to halt my progression and I didn't have to do the phone check-in. All of that meant that I could slip my way into the vault and store all of the pardons somewhere on my person, before sleuthing my way past the remaining guards and back up to the surface. With all of my duties in the White House finally completed, I boarded Locke's helicopter, finishing the game and proving that yes, you can indeed beat Payday 2 as an Olympic athlete, especially fitting well within the parameters of their sports and not breaking any rules whatsoever. Oh. Damn. Alright, in all fairness, I want to come clean and admit that I did discover the exact specifications of just what gun types are used in the Olympic shooting categories about 2/3 of the way through the challenge. But by that point I was too deep to redo the entire project and I wanted to make sure I was still on track with my other ones. So if you want to class this as a failed run, then sure, but personally I was just too far in to rectify things without scrapping the entire run. In any case, that's the end of the challenge. Next one should hopefully be out at the end of the month, and that should probably be enough of a hint as to what that might involve. Either way, throw us a like if you enjoyed, subscribe for more, and feel free to leave any suggestions for future challenge runs in the comments below. I'm always open to ideas, and what you suggest to me could end up being a future video. But until that point comes along, I'll see you on whatever I do next. Take care now.